Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about React and BEM. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, great video. Thank you. I am having this problem in my company where the new hire people or React developers don't want to use BEM, but they want to use CSS modules. And I have the same opinion as you do. So for context to the others, so to the rest of you, this was posted on a video where I was asked to compare BEM versus CSS modules, and the basic opinion that I have is that BEM is my preferred choice. And so he says, and I have the same opinion as you do. However, I've been outnumbered and it is frustrating. I will use your video as a tool to prove the BEM point. Do you have any suggestions? Well, first and foremost, it's not using my video against this argument is, unless you like, I would say this, just use my arguments. If you liked my arguments, pick them up and use them yourself, because like just showing my video is probably not going to help you all that much if you're dealing with people who are on the hype train. I'm not saying this or that, but let's just say that there is a very, very strong influence on developers from the source and how much they respect and know the source of the information. In other words, what I'm trying to say to you is that if I were to do the same talk with a nice presentation on stage at Google I/O, you might have a chance of having them hear you out or hear me out. Me sitting in a bathtub or walking around as a random person is probably not going to help you. So what I suggest is that you take the arguments. And for those of you who haven't watched that video, basically the arguments that I'm making here is that when you're dealing with BEM versus CSS modules, fundamentally from my perspective, fundamentally the main benefit the CSS modules gives you is the ability to write actually worse CSS code than if you were to use BEM. They are equal in every single sense apart from one area, which is that you can't just reuse the same exact name, such as container. Every single person likes to call something a container when they're dealing with CSS. And in CSS modules, you can just say container, container, container. In BEM, you cannot, because you need to follow the rule that each of the CSS, or the blocks at the very least, well, technically all of the classes you're going to use, should be unique, because they're all in the same namespace. Now, that is a very good thing if you know how to use it, because it actually forces you to give semantic meaning to your elements, which makes it much searchable. It makes it much easier for you to actually understand what's part of the scope. And it becomes a deterministic thing. In other words, you don't generate CSS, you know ahead of time what the CSS class name is going to be, which is a very powerful thing. On the CSS module hand, it's more convenient. The problem is that it also generates these hashes, and it creates an undeterministic class system or a selector system. And apart from that, it of course also requires you to generate things. In other words, you actually have to tie your JavaScript together with your CSS. There is no flexibility. You see, BEM works 100% of the time for everything because it's just CSS. It's plain CSS. CSS modules requires a specific workflow, and it actually adds, especially when you get up to size, and I know this since I'm dealing with that pain right now, it actually adds time to your bundling. So it's not for free. Now, this is not a comparison, like the question isn't about comparing these two, it's more about how to deal with an argument where you have one group of people, which in this case is the minority, trying to represent one viewpoint, and then you have the majority, which is on the hype train. Now, I'm going to let you down, and I'm going to let you down hard, and I'm going to tell you that I've found in line with what I was saying earlier, that the best and simplest way to win an argument in an IT discussion is to be the most respected developer in the group. And even then it's going to be hard. If you are the senior developer, it's usually easy. If you are a senior developer, it's often very simple for you to crush the arguments of, say, a junior developer. It doesn't matter how strong their opinion is, because they have lower value in the company, and your word has more sway. I've had many situations where this has been the case, where either myself or my boss or whoever, like people have done it to me and I have done it to people. If you are the senior and you just say, no, I don't think this is a good idea, and then you clearly explain why, even if the other person has something going on with their arguments, they can't win the discussion because they don't have seniority. And it is unfair. It is unfair as fuck. And I promise you, before your career is over, you're gonna think back on what I just said, and you're gonna remember a time when you won an argument, not because necessarily you proved that your point was superior to that of the other person. It was just that they have no way of influencing the situation in their favor, where you did, and most likely that was because you already had the respect of everybody in the room, or seniority. So what I suggest that you do is the only thing you actually can do, and that is to very clearly and logically explain your point. Try to compare the pros and the cons between CSS modules and BEM. It doesn't matter if it's this specific case, it can be any case, and just logically represent your case. Argue for your viewpoint. And odds are that they're not going to they might hear you out, but odds are that their emotions is going to still win, because emotions is a very, very big thing in developers who lack, I don't want to call it experience, I want to call it the pain and misery of dealing with the fallout of bad decisions. And maybe that is exactly what experience is in this scenario, but that's what it is. If you have seen what happens when you make bad decisions and you have to deal with them, you get more conservative. And that's why I really believe that the most senior developers are some of the, well, I'm not going to say the most bitter people in the world. I'm going to say the most conservative in many cases. They know what's going to work and they know what's not going to work, and they only experiment when they know that it's very likely that this is a beneficial experiment. So that's what you can do. And here's what I suggest you do if you lose that argument. And I'm sorry to say that it's likely that you're going to lose the argument. Be an adult about it. Be a professional about it. And start looking into how you can make CSS modules a great success. Because if you've already gotten to the point where you lost out on an argument or a technical decision, then just agree to disagree and then commit to the success of the project. Don't sabotage, don't try to like disrupt the success of the project just because you didn't get things to go the way you wanted. Go for actually learning enough about CSS modules to figure out, okay, what are the benefits here? How can we set this up so that it works in our favor? Because the thing is, guys, just because you use BEM, that doesn't mean that you're going to have success. And just because you use CSS modules, that doesn't mean that you're going to have success. You're going to have to figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And you can make both of these things work. It's just different. It's just, at the end of the day, a different set of pros and cons that you're dealing with. And you can always, as I like to say, you have the cards that you have been dealt. But you can always control how you play the hand. And that's exactly what I think that you should do here. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you are finding yourself in a situation where you are the minority in a discussion on what technical decision you should make, the only thing you can ever do is just to present your point. You usually win if you have the seniority to actually do this. You usually win if people respect you and so forth. In some cases, I've found myself where I've been the minority. It didn't matter because they immediately saw my point, and I actually got my point through well enough that I got what I wanted, or like we went with the suggestion that I made. But I've also been in many situations in this scenario where the reverse is true, where the manager, like the CTO or whoever, someone who has a lot more influence, can come in and sway the entire company their way, and there is nothing you can do about that. It comes down to a very primal thing that we humans do. So if you're in that situation, argue your point, try to make a good case for what you're saying, and if you fail and things go the other way, try to figure out the best possible way of dealing with the outcome of this, because you can make a success case of practically any choice as long as you try your best to actually figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. Hopefully that is going to be useful to you. Have a great day.